Have you ever met someone who always wants to borrow or use your stuff, but never wants to let you use or borrow their stuff? Have you ever met someone or been friends with somebody who's always suspicious of other people, feeling like they're the victim, people are out to get them, or the world's got it out for them? A lot of time, these people take up a lot of space in our social circles, in our friend groups, or just any room that we happen to be sharing with them. They demand so much of our attention because we always have to be monitoring what it is that they're doing, how they're trying to control what they have or control what other people have. These people can be exhausting. And while I have a long list of people who I can say like, man, that is this person for sure. If I'm honest, there's ways that I'm that person. And I would imagine that if you're honest, there's ways that you are that person. Where there's times that we get so focused on trying to control what we have, acquire what we don't have, and then defend what we don't want to lose, that we lose sight of the other people in the room. Whether it's the emotional needs of other people in the room, or just the very real, tangible needs of the other people in our life. Because we're so focused on being the kings or queens of our own kingdom. And so whether you're sitting here thinking, I don't have any sort of kingdom, I don't have any sort of power or influence, or you think, yeah, man, I've worked really hard to have the influence, the stuff, the money, the kingdom that I have. We all have a certain degree of that. As I've been thinking about the Christmas story and the characters involved in the Christmas story, I keep coming back to Herod. Because in the midst of all my stuff, right? Like all my friendships, my work stuff, the school that I've accomplished, the degrees that I have, the money that I have, all the stuff that I have. The question I keep coming back to when I'm looking at Herod in the Nativity story is there room for a king that's greater than me in my kingdom? All right, let's start in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. All right, again, Matthew does not give us a ton of detail about the Magi, which we talked about last week, or King Herod, other than the Magi came to, that Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod. So here's a little bit of just a tiny bit of background about King Herod that helps us understand a bit more about the kind of power that he had as king. First, I think it's important to recognize that history knows Herod as Herod the Great. Everything King Herod did was to make his name great. Man, this guy did everything to ensure that he was top of every list of every group that he could imagine. So first, King Herod made for himself 3 different palaces. The one that he lived in, and then 2 others that were bigger than any other palace known outside of Rome. And these 2 other palaces were just in case he had to escape to them, he would have a place to go. So these 2 other palaces he didn't live in. They were just there in case he needed them. And he felt like he needed these because King Herod was especially suspicious of everybody. I mean, he executed his brothers, he executed one of his wives, he executed his closest allies who he put in positions of power to manipulate the system because he was always worried that someone was out to get him. So that's a little bit of context about King Herod. He had power, he had influence, he had connection. And I want us to go back and think, man, while we may not have like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos type of power and wealth, what is the kingdom that you have control over? And it may just be within your own heart, right? Like you get to determine the media that you consume, the way that you spend your money, the way that you spend your time. You have power over these things. You have influence. Maybe you have influence and power over your social circles, where you know that if you suggest something, your other friends will listen to you. If you decide that there's someone in your friend group that you don't really want to be in your friend group anymore, all you have to do is tell a story, divulge a secret, or make a joke, and that friend isn't going to be around much longer. What kind of power or influence do you have? All right, let's move on. So King Herod started with a crazy amount of power. But as the story progresses, as Jesus' story progresses through Matthew, we see that power lead to a certain amount of insecurity. So we continue on in verse 3, where it says, when King Herod heard this, that Jesus was born, he was disturbed and all Jerusalem with him. So King Herod finds out that another king of the Jews has been born. Now, for a guy who has 3 different palaces, who is not afraid to execute people close to him to ensure that he maintains his power, to find out a king was born that he didn't know about in his region that was going to rule over the people that he had control over, this is problematic for him. And you could imagine that if a ruler and a tyrant who felt like his position was being threatened, that would cause problems for everybody else in Jerusalem. Like I was talking about at the very beginning, like those people who always feel like the world's out to get them. Man, you just got to walk around eggshells. You have to think about everything you say and how it might be interpreted. So when it says King Herod was disturbed and all Jerusalem with him, when maintaining power and influence is the primary goal, that's the thing that's going to make me. As soon as someone who might possibly have more of something than you do comes into the picture, what that does is that instills like such insecurity. Like, oh wait, if this person if my friend group thinks they're funnier, or if they're more popular or better at the thing that I think I'm good at, then I start to lose all this. And if I lose all this, then who am I? And we see that in Herod. And here's what I want to say is, if we spend so much of our time trying to create for ourselves kingdoms that we're the center of, and we don't spend any time or aren't spending enough time with the king who is greater than me, the king who is greater than you, then when someone who comes that is actually greater than you, that is not good news. It's actually terrifying. And we have a decision to make. See, Herod, his story isn't one of increasing freedom, but actually an oppressive fear. The more he hears about Jesus, the more he learns about Jesus, the more fearful, the more angry, and the more violent he becomes. So the story continues with Herod. In verse 16 of chapter 2, it says, when Herod realized he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Let's quick recap. King Herod had all this power, all this influence that he had worked for, had placed himself at the center of. And all that turned into a great insecurity when he heard that there was another king in his kingdom. And where that insecurity led him was to this massacre of innocent children. Now, I'm not presuming that our insecurities will lead us to such an extreme as we see here with King Herod. But here's what I know. I know that sin will always cost us more than we were willing to pay, and it will keep us longer than we ever wanted to stay. I want to say that again. Sin will always keep us longer than we wanted to stay and cost us more than we ever wanted to pay. When we choose to not accept the invitation to come worship the King who is greater than us, we are choosing to commit ourselves to a kingdom other than the Lord's. See, Jesus comes, and the Magi and Herod both receive the same invitation at the same time. See, let's go back to verse 5 in chapter 2, where it says, "In Bethlehem in Judea, for it is written, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." When Herod hears this read, along with the Magi's, that is his invitation. This unexpected invitation to come worship this baby king in Jesus. The Magi choose to continue and accept that invitation and go to Bethlehem, find Jesus, worship him, and bring him gifts. But Herod does not. Herod chooses to defend his own power, to try to secure his own influence, to continue to make sure that he is the only king of his kingdom. And it leads him to this place of great insecurity and ultimately this massacre of innocent children. Sin will cost us more than we ever wanted to pay, and it will keep us longer than we ever wanted to stay. I'm not saying that there's not grace and that our stuckness and the cost of sin is permanent and everlasting and we can never get out. This is the gospel of Jesus, that we were always invited to come back to Jesus. In Jesus, we are set free from the cost that we can't pay. We are set free from the sin that we cannot get out of. But we need to accept that invitation, and we see in Herod what happens when that invitation is rejected. So, what does this mean for us? What are the questions that we're left with? What is the questions that Matthew is asking us as he's telling us the story of Herod? For me, it's, what is the part of my life that I am keeping separate from Jesus? I don't live in a palace. I don't command the world's wealth. But I do have power. I do have influence. I do have control over things. And there are certain parts of my life that, if I'm being honest, I would prefer to keep to myself than to give over to Jesus, at risk of potentially, possibly losing all this stuff that I've worked for. Maybe it's my reputation. Maybe it's the preferences on how I spend my money. Maybe it's the groups that I associate with. Whatever it is for you, what is the space that, if you're being honest, you've kept it separate from Jesus? Maybe you've compartmentalized and said, this is the part of my life that I'll let Jesus have control over. But this over here, this has nothing to do with Jesus. I will make sure. I will be in control of this. It's in those spaces where Jesus comes as King and invites you, invites me, to bring that part of us to him and let him be the ruler of it. There is freedom in the stable. There is terror in the palace. My friends, I hope that this has helped broaden and deepen our understanding of the complexity of the characters involved in this story. I hope you see how unexpected these invitations are to the Magi and to Herod. And next week we're going to look at the shepherds and how unexpected those invitations were too. My friends, there is freedom in Jesus. We get to live freely when we worship the King who has come. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next week.